Hello, I'm Joan Landis. I'm really happy to be here with you again today. So our last lesson, we talked about the general idea of your emotional world mirrors our physical world and how the environment can trigger presenting behaviors and secondary primary emotions that are really influenced by core issues in our past. So we're going to go ahead and talk more in detail about that now. So now we're going to go more in depth into your inner world and how it helps to explain a lot of our behaviors and feelings. So again, the very outside layer of your inner world is your environment. And that's the stressors, events, the forces, even things like the culture and traditions you grow up in, the influences around you. So that environment could be everything from the media to your government, to your church, to your family, to having to pay taxes, the IRS, law enforcement, inflation, illness, things like that. Anything that happens out in your environment that can create stressors. Of course, your job is a great stressor. Financial issues can be great stressors. Children, spouses, people, of course, neighbors can be great stressors out in the environment. So those are the things that can trigger us to have a reaction. And that's very similar to what happens in the weather, right? So the weather can create storms and lightning and tornadoes, but it can also be sunshine and things like that. So those types of weather-related events really do make an impact on the earth. But the biggest impacts on the earth, as far as the earth formations and canyons and earthquakes and volcanoes and plate tectonics and tidal waves, those are not weather-related events. The weather-related events make some significant stressors, but they don't change the face of the land. They don't change the face of the earth very much. They do kind of over time, but they don't make the sudden big differences. Those sudden big differences don't come from the weather, but the environment and the weather really do impact. It triggers our presenting behaviors. Okay, presenting behaviors. The top three are freeze, flee, and fight. Also addictions, acting out. Acting out is just another word for anything we do that's kind of an unhealthy coping mechanism. Also, we reject others, we stonewall, we ignore, we avoid, we deny, we get in conflict, we blame, we criticize. That's a really common presenting behavior is we get critical of people. We can become victim-y, and other presenting behaviors are we can kind of shut down. We can do those things where we're not acting at all. That's a version of freezing. And then other versions of fighting might be, physically getting violent or using our words to put people down, to insult people. Another way of avoiding fleeing would be to isolate yourself. A lot of people, when they're under stress, they isolate. And that is, for the most part, an unhealthy coping mechanism. So presenting behaviors can be anything that we can see other people do and they can see us do. And so for that reason, the presenting behavior, we make it green so that it represents the earth that we're standing on, okay? So I can see the mountains and I can see the green grass and the fields and I can see the earth. And so it's like we can see the presenting behaviors that people act out in front of our eyes, okay? Now, the presenting behaviors are simply a symptom of what we call our secondary behaviors, okay? So our secondary behaviors, for the most part, our secondary behaviors secondary emotions, are the ones that we can kind of talk about easier And the secondary emotions don't make us feel quite as vulnerable as the primary emotions. And so the secondary emotions still give us a sense of protection, a little bit of a layer of protection between the tender emotions that we're going to get to next and the way that we act out. And so the top three secondary emotions are anger, anxiety, and depression. And anger especially is a really common one, especially among men. I think this Western civilization, they really, in Western civilization, Western culture, in a way, men are really only allowed to have one basic negative emotion, and that is anger. It's not as considered as manly and as acceptable to be anxious, worried, or depressed. Certainly sad, hopeless, jealous, and hatred. That is probably something that Western culture says that men are allowed to do. But the most common one that men tend to go to is anger. Now, women as a group tend to have a wider range of secondary emotions that they feel okay to engage in. And so, there's a lot of things that women tend to feel comfortable expressing. Men, a lot of times, don't feel as comfortable, and so they tend to go to anger. But the secondary emotions are simply symptoms of the next layer down. And this is what we call our primary emotions. And this is the secondary emotions are kind of like the ocean, below the level of the earth. And there's a lot of movement. We can see a lot of the ocean. We can see a lot of the results of secondary emotions. And so that's one of the reasons we have a kind of the blue like the ocean. And underneath that is like the mantle of the earth that the plates and the oceans rest on. And these are the primary emotions. The primary emotions are beneath the secondary emotions. They drive the secondary emotions, and the secondary emotions kind of cover the primary emotions. Now, one of the reasons we feel like we need to cover our primary emotions is because they tend to make us feel very vulnerable. And when we feel that vulnerable, it's not a safe feeling. It's not a powerful feeling. It can be quite a scary feeling. And so most of us really don't want to connect with that very much. And the top three primary emotions that I see in my practice are fear, hurt, and shame. It's the feeling, it's the emotion that says I'm scared, or I'm hurt, or I feel ashamed. Now, you can just sense how tender those emotions are. You really don't ever go to your best friend and say, wow, I feel really ashamed today. Nobody does that. But we will go to our friend and say, well, I feel really depressed. I'm anxious. I'm really mad. I hate this. I'm really jealous. I feel hopeless. We do talk about those a little more. But the primary emotions make us feel extremely vulnerable. Other ones are feeling lonely, rejected, feeling unworthy. And then another one that isn't listed here right now is self-disgust or self-loathing. And that's a very important primary emotion that can make us feel very, very vulnerable. But even that is not the end of the story, because what drives our primary emotions are what we call our core issues. Now, what are core issues? Core issues are unfinished business from the past. Bad things that happened in the past, but the key is they didn't end well. You can have something bad, but it ends well, and it won't necessarily give you a core issue, okay? It's the ones that don't end well. And so it leaves us with deep questions or doubts about ourselves at our core. And the top two core issues that I see are the feeling of, the core issue of worth. Am I even worth anything? Or the core issue of lovability. Am I even lovable? Those are the top two. And then other ones seem to be goodness. Am I good, or is there any goodness in the world? Can I trust anybody? Can I even trust myself? Do I belong anywhere? Do I feel safe? And those are all really important aspects that if we have some struggles with those basic issues about ourselves, then that will tend to cast doubt and distress on many of our other relationships and events in our lives. And so what happens with this is if you have all of them wrapped up in one big, hot boiling lava mess, that we call that someone who has abandonment issues, because with abandonment issues, you have all of those are triggered, okay? When someone has a core issue, it's as if they're emotionally sunburned. And when something happens in their lives that triggers this core issue, that raises questions about their lovability, that raises doubts about their self-worth, then what happens is it's as if a volcano erupts from that molten core, and it explodes through all these emotions. You get primary emotions, secondary emotions, you get the behavior. And this is what people see on the outside. People see the explosion. They see the volcano that happens. And most of the time, they have no idea what's going on. They think, well, gosh, the stressor wasn't that big. What's the big deal? Why did that small event create this business? Well, because that small event triggered some memory or feeling or question or reminder about these things that happened in the past that did not end well and left us with significant doubts or hurts or fears about these core issues about ourselves. And so when these are triggered, we have an explosion through all the layers, and this is what we see. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be an angry explosion. It could be lots of different ways. So just for fun, let's see if we can connect the dots for an experience and see how this works. So say in your environment, your boss says to you, hey, you know what, the last quarter you haven't been doing very well, and you need to up your game. If you don't, we're going to have to demote you or maybe even fire you. Okay, so that's the stressor in your environment, right? And what you find yourself doing is you find yourself trying to fight with him. You're trying to argue with him, and you're trying to say, no, that's not true. Look at this, and maybe he slams the door on you, right? And so after you've tried to fight, then what's driving that fighting behavior is that you actually feel angry, right? But what's underneath the anger? What's underneath the anger? I don't know. Let's see. What would it be? For everyone, it's going to be a little different. But maybe you're afraid that you're going to lose your job. You're hurt that he would treat you like that. You feel ashamed that you're not doing as well as other people. You're feeling kind of unworthy. You're like, wow, maybe I really am not good enough. And then what's underneath that is this idea of, what core issue was triggered? Wow, actually, I felt pretty worthless. When he said that out here, it triggered my feelings of being basically worthless unless I perform well. And when I didn't perform well, when he let me know that, then what happened was I felt scared. Here's my volcano going, right? Going through that layer. Fear, hurt, shame, unworthy, maybe even rejected. Boom, right? That layer was completed. And then the lava goes through this layer. What are the secondary emotions? Anger, for sure. Maybe some anxiety, right? So it goes through that layer. And then what's the behavior? The behavior is I was trying to fight with him, right? And I was trying to argue it out. Maybe I'm trying to blame him and saying he's the stupidest boss ever. Maybe I'm denying some of the things that I should have done better because I don't really want to look at it. That really spooks me. And so my volcano is I stomp out of the office and slam the door, and I'm like, I'm not gonna work for this stupid boss ever again. So that's kind of the thing that happens. That's the volcano. So that's just connecting the dots for this particular situation. And I really want you to learn how to notice what happened in the environment, okay? and how you presented, what behaviors that you acted on, and what was driving those behaviors, the secondary emotions, and see if you can also connect what were your primary emotions that were driving your secondary emotions, and then what were the core issues that were driving the primary emotions, right? Now, if you can get down into these areas, this is like gold, right? If you can figure out what your core issues are, this is really important stuff to know. Because once you know where your sore spots are, why you have your volcanoes, when you have that self-awareness, that's really a first step in order to solving the problem. Because then you'll know, okay, what do I have to do to heal this and soothe this? And how can I have people around me aware of these so that instead of provoking and triggering these, that they can do a little more to soothe it. But on the other hand, I'm self-aware, and so when I feel like I'm going to explode, I can take a minute and really look at this and go, oh, you know what? What's going on right now? I feel like I'm going to explode, but really it's not my boss. My boss simply was there in the moment. But the reason I'm so sensitive about this is because something happened, maybe my dad or my mom or some grade school teacher, and I got shamed and humiliated. I felt worthless, and I'm still really, really sensitive about that. So when you can have some insight about this stuff, then you can start knowing where you need to go to actually heal it. So the first step is to connect those dots. So that's what we're going to be doing for the action item, is to actually connect the dots up for yourself in the next few days, and then share on the forums what you have discovered and what your particular core issues are. We all have core issues. Everybody has core issues because we all have things in our past that happened that ended badly, okay? And that's just how life is. Some of our core issues are heavier than others. Some people have more core issues than others, but we all have them. For sure, we all have them. And the nice thing about this model is that when we have this model, we can have a lot of compassion on people who are having their eruptions, those volcanoes in their lives, whether it's addictions or fighting or fleeing or avoiding, whatever these are, that we can have a lot of compassion on people in our lives that are struggling with these type of behaviors, because we know it's not because they're just a bad person. It's not because they're evil. It's not because they're weak. It's because most of the time they're in pain. Okay, they're in pain. Something's just rubbed that, put salt into that wound, and it hurts. And that's how they show it. Okay. When we can have this understanding of what really drives people's emotions and behaviors, we can have a lot of compassion for people, even when they're acting badly. And what I think is also cool is we can also have compassion for ourselves when we're acting badly, because we realize it's not because we're bad, evil people. It's because something was triggered and we were in a lot of pain and we didn't know how to soothe ourselves. We didn't know how to handle it. We just reacted, boom, like that.
I hope this has been helpful to you, to just take apart what some of those primary, secondary emotions are, the core issues, the presenting behaviors, and some of the external stressors that can set it all off. And what I'd love for you to do for your action item this week is go ahead and get the worksheet off of the site and see if you can connect the layers for yourself. So what we want you to do is, whenever you are feeling or behaving badly this week, at least once or twice, do this for yourself. See if you can start connecting the layers and maybe even be able to determine what your core issues are. Once you know your core issues, then you can tell others and help others understand why you're so reactive and what they can do to soothe those core issues. It's going to really help people around you understand you better and be able to help de-escalate you when you are triggered. And then knowing certain vulnerabilities that you have for yourself, that you can also be a little bit thoughtful about when you get triggered and what's going on. That really, when you get triggered, it's really not the person in front of you that's really the problem. The big problem is the unhealed pain from your past. And so instead of blaming them, you can start being a little more introspective about what you can do to help yourself. So I would like you to, at least once or twice this week, whenever you're behaving or feeling something kind of negative, go ahead and see if you can start from the outside of that worksheet and work your way in and figure out what your external stressor was, what your presenting behavior was, what your secondary emotion was, what your primary emotion was, what your core issue was. And I think that's going to give you some understanding for yourself. Now, if you want extra credit, since you didn't have an action item for the last lesson, if you have somebody in your life that's particularly volatile, that has their own volcanoes a lot, see if you can start putting yourself in their shoes. Maybe especially if you know some of their personal history, maybe. But see if you can start connecting the layers for them. Trying to figure out what's their secondary emotion, primary emotion, maybe even their core issues. And that will give you a lot more compassion for where they're coming from, instead of just kind of standing and judging them. And that compassion really can make all the difference. So I hope you have fun with this. I hope that it really starts making some insights for you about yourself and the people around you.